Out of the road, all the way out of the road, or I'll put you under arrest. Everyone out of the road. Out of the road.
No, bro.
Hey, get back there.
Whose fucking road is it?
Out of the road.
All right. How's everyone feeling today?
Good.
Thank you so much for being here. My name is David Chavez. I'm with Nighthawk Chicago, your new favorite community bar, I hope. This is part of a series called Juxtaposition, Ideas on Art, Ideas and Global Currents.
I think it's global cross currents.
Global cross currents, sorry. Thank you so much to Danny Postel for helping to put this together for us. We wanted to do this kind of a series here in the bar because it's something that's important to our communities, and also bringing it to street level where anyone can come in and be a part of these conversations is also very important to us. And yeah, these ideas are really current and really important to not just our communities but the city as a whole. And we just want to thank everyone, all the panelists for being here, being part of this today. Thank you for bearing with us. This event was originally supposed to take place out on the patio, the beautiful back patio, but because it got a little chilly, we pivoted last minute to indoors. So we thank you for your patience and understanding. I'm also not a sound engineer or technician, so we'll hope that this works well. I think it will, but thank you again, and yeah, I'll pass it on to Danny. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you, David. Thank you to the whole Nighthawk crew. Which, you know, for those who haven't been here before, I sense that several people here today, this is your first time at Nighthawk, right? Hopefully not your last. This is a very special neighborhood bar here in Albany Park, and it's really meaningful for New Lines Magazine to be partnering with Nighthawk on this series. I should say that today's event is also, it's a co-production of Nighthawk and New Lines Magazine with the co-sponsorship of Borderless Magazine, which is a Chicago-based publication that if you haven't read it, you definitely should. It's a vital source of storytelling and community news about immigrant and refugee communities here in Chicago. So thanks to Borderless Magazine for co-sponsoring today. So for those who don't know me, my name is Danny Postel. I'm the politics editor of New Lines Magazine. And for those who don't know New Lines Magazine, you can check it out online. It's free, no paywall, no subscription required, open access, and public domain. You are welcome to check out New Lines Magazine. We are a global affairs publication that deals with really we have a principal focus on the global south, but not an exclusive one. We also deal increasingly with what's happening here in the United States. And this last week, in fact, the main article we published was about Chicago and the Trump administration's war on Chicago, how immigrant communities are being targeted and how people in neighborhoods here in Chicago are pushing back on that assault, which is exactly the topic of today's panel. So, with that said, the format is going to be something like this, and I'm going to introduce our speakers. I'm just going to ask them each a question, maybe 1.5 questions. I might have a mini follow-up question for each of them, but I want to get the audience involved early and often. You don't have to wait until the front end of the program is over. If you have a question, raise your hand at any point, and we will get you in, okay? I'm really here more as a facilitator, not as a speaker. So I want to thank our four panelists who, I've told this to them directly as well, given how incredibly busy they all are with doing frontline work, okay? Carving out 2 hours on a Sunday afternoon is not something that I took for granted. It's something that I'm very grateful for. They're all working very, very, basically around the clock on these issues, as you'll find out, okay? So I want to start with Francia Garcia Hernandez, who's a reporter for Block Club Chicago. She covers principally Pilsen, Little Village, and back of the yards. And I mention that because if you read Block Club Chicago, you know that it's very much, the reporting in Block Club Chicago is structured around neighborhoods, right? The whole kind of architecture of that publication, which I consider probably the greatest single news source in Chicago at this moment, Block Club Chicago. It is where I turn for very specific, micro-level, neighborhood, community news. And I would say that since the onslaught of Operation Midway Blitz, it has become just basically a essential reading, a lifeblood for anybody who wants to know what's going on in this city. And Francia's beat, I mean, already, even before the Operation Midway Blitz, was in the nerve center of immigrant communities, specifically Mexican immigrant communities in Chicago, in Pilsen and Little Village. But now her reporting has taken on an even, I would say, more momentous sort of weight. So if you're not familiar with Block Club Chicago, I have a feeling people in this room probably are, but if you're not, check it out. It is an incredible publication. You can get on their email list, you can follow them on social media, and you should particularly look at Francia's reporting. Xanat Sobrevilla is an organizer with OCAD, Organized Communities Against Deportations. And we'll be hearing more about the work of OCAD shortly. Mark Fleming is Associate Director of Federal Litigation at the National Immigrant Justice Center, which is a national organization. Mark is based here in Chicago. And Audrey Nicolaides is the Chicago coordinator and a core faculty member at the Brooklyn Institute for Social Research, where she teaches courses on, among other things, fascism. So, with that said, Francia, let me start with a question for you. Tell us a little bit about as I said a moment ago, about the way Block Club Chicago approaches journalism in the city. You have a very specific beat, which is these neighborhoods, but your beat, especially in the last few weeks, has basically become the war on Chicago, the war on immigrant communities, right? And I want to ask you a little bit about how this is playing out in the particular neighborhoods that you cover, and also what are the kinds of things that you're seeing on the Southwest Side in terms of not only the assault on immigrant communities, but how people are organizing and fighting back?
Thank you for the question. And yeah, so like you mentioned, Block Club is a neighborhood-based organization. So we are a newsroom, but we're divided. We have reporters in pretty much every corner of the city where we have assigned beats, which are neighborhoods. So I mostly cover Pilsen, Little Village, and Back of the Yards. And I would say pretty much since the start of this year, that has also kind of expanded a little bit more toward Brighton Park, Gage Park, Chicago Lawn, Midway. And at the start of Operation Midway Blitz, and before we even had a name for it, before the administration came out and said, this is what we're starting to call this, we knew that Trump had threatened to send the National Guard for a few weeks. And that didn't really happen then, but we also knew that it had threatened to send hundreds of Border Patrol and ICE agents to Chicago, and we didn't know where they would be going. So on September 7th, that was a Sunday, we heard reports from Brighton Park, Archer Heights, and Gage Park that some people had been detained. There was initially reports of 3 people taken at a gas station, at a bus stop outside a gas station in Archer Heights, somebody that was walking on the sidewalk, and a flower vendor that was selling streets at an intersection in Brighton Park. At that time, we assumed that could be the start of these ramped up operations, but we didn't know for sure. And eventually that Monday we found out that this would be the new operation called Midway Blitz, and with that we just have seen an uptick in presence of ICE and Border Patrol agents in these neighborhoods, Little Village, Pilsen, Brighton Park, Back of the Yards, and really all over the city, as probably all of you know now. We have seen increasing use of force, by agents, especially Border Patrol, but not exclusively to them. It's also ICE. And it has really changed the way we report for Ball Club, because now we are doing daily recaps of what's happening, what we see happening. And for that, like Xanat is here, but other organizations that have organized rapid response teams throughout the city have been essential. There's so much activity, and for a newsroom that is quite large for traditional, or like for an independent newsroom, but it's not as big to have a reporter in every corner of the city literally watching for the tensions. We really rely on rapid response teams to report what they're seeing on the ground, to report tips or ICE sightings or suspected ICE sightings, and then confirm and get information about who's being detained and how they're being detained, which we have increasingly seen it's more aggressive.
And some of the repression is, of course, the primary target of the repression is immigrant communities, right? And it's been so scattershot and so, such a dragnet. But my understanding is that there's also, for example, in the communities you cover, Francia, that some of the people documenting, some of the rapid response teams and the people documenting the repression and the abductions of immigrants are themselves now being targeted.
Yes, that's correct. We reported on the detention of 3 members of a rapid response team on the southwest side. I want to say maybe it was 2 weeks ago, and 2 more people were detained this Thursday, the same day that there was a raid at Swaporama in back of the yards. So we have seen that as well, and there are concerns, and it's a concern that among organizers, I think, that we are in touch with has also existed and has been brought up, because people have been followed to their cars, they have been intimidated, they have been threatened, and in the case of the 3 organizers who were detained, they were taken to Broadview for a few hours and later released, but that was a very shocking experience for them as far as we know.
Xanat, and we'll come back to some of Francia's reporting, but Xanat, I want to ask you about the organization that you work for, OCAD, Organized Communities Against Deportations. Tell us what does the organization do, and how has its work changed in the last few weeks since this intensified, the intensification of the war on immigrants in Chicago?
Our group came about from young people. I came when I was 9 from Mexico, and I come from a community in the 90s that was feeling the consequences of NAFTA and other situations that were making it difficult to live in our home countries. In 2010, 2011, it just so coincided that a lot of young people with my similar experience coming in around the same time, struggling. I had just graduated from college. We're trying to connect, and we started to connect. In Chicago, we had a friend who was in removal proceedings in 2009, and the best he would get was like, that's it. The judge ordered your removal, that's it. But it just so happened, coincidentally, that he was sharing this with other undocumented young people, and the choice at that moment was to make a public campaign about it. And we had our friend Diego Padilla be able to stay in the US, and that came out of being visible. So that taught us, one, that the people that organized and were able to protect and have our friend Diego Padilla stay were all undocumented. And it also taught us the power of visibility. So ever since 2010, we would do Coming Out of the Shadows, 10, 12 people of, people willing to share their story. We would do that with the purpose of connecting with other people with similar experiences that just needed a community, and also to inform and hopefully think about alternatives to how we could exist and support each other. I say this because that's the thing, the teaching, the lessons that has allowed us to persist. Our community is way beyond that start group in 2010. And before us, there had also been people that had been fighting, publicly. 2006, 2007, the marches and all of that. But I think what it taught us that being an organized community, a network of support, could make the difference. And I think in this moment, that's what we see, that we have each other's back, right? If nobody else appreciates our community, we will. That's just a reminder, and that's what I see day in and day out right now. I see our neighborhoods being brutalized. I don't know what the words to put to that, but and I see people trying to do the alternative, not only to protect each other, but to create the world that feels good and that we can thrive, and then we can have better solutions of networks of support. I say that is what OCAD has been striving to be, and plant seeds here and there. And I think we see some of those, seedlings coming out now more than ever that we need them. But that's the reason we persist and we continue to exist. I think a lot of the things that we do are just projects of our imagination and lessons of the past. I think we learn and get inspired a lot by the work of the Black community and organizing during the Civil Rights Movement. Rapid response teams can come out of those lessons. It's not something that has just been created right now. It's something that we have seen communities that have been oppressed, targeted, do. I think now we have phones and we are able to let loved ones know that their person was taken and is in this situation because of the technology. But yeah, I think it's a continuous project of mutual aid, of resistance, of trying to exist in maybe places that continue to push back on your existence.
I had the honor of interviewing you for this story for New Lines Magazine about the situation in Chicago, and you said something really, you said a bunch of interesting stuff, but one of the things that really stuck out in my mind was you said that networks are being created of support, and they need to, just like you said now, that people are relying on each other rather than the state to ensure our well-being. And I was wondering if you could expand a little bit on that part, the rather than the state part. And when you say state, do you mean the federal government? Do you mean state of Illinois? Do you mean the city of Chicago? Because there are agencies, right? And there are offices at the city level, at the county level, at the state level, that are in principle on the side of immigrant communities, right? Like the mayor of Chicago and the governor of Illinois are standing up against the Trump administration's war on Chicago. So I'm wondering if you could just kind of get a little bit more into the specifics of what you meant by rather than the state.
I would say that the things that has allowed poor Black and brown communities to persist have been projects of poor Black communities creating them. I mean, the breakfast programs in our schools, I say that a lot of times we have to create a culture of mutual aid, and then sometimes the state will adopt those things. I say that it's the words that are being shared at times by the governor are great, but I think we're the ones that give it life, or we push for that audacity or that ability to do that by doing the right thing for us. In the times of when was it, Abbott was sending folks from Texas in buses, I think it was community fitting people and making the police stations, I wouldn't say they were great situations, but saving lives. And it wasn't coming from top down, it was our communities providing and creating the networks. So I think a lot of that is created by us, and then maybe sometimes backed by the state in different levels. But we are the ones that really push forward to really save ourselves. And that's what I mean.
Oh, thanks for that. Mark, tell us a little bit about what the National Immigrant Justice Center is doing in the face of all of this.
Yeah, hi everyone. So the National Immigrant Justice Center has been the largest provider of direct representation to immigrants in the Midwest, and particularly in the Chicago area, for going on 3 decades now. In recent years and recent decades, we've been expanding into a lot of more strategic litigation. And we're, at the forefront in the city with allies at the forefront of quote unquote sanctuary laws. When during the Obama administration, we started seeing people left and right being picked up on immigration detainers from state and local jails and prisons, we were the first here in Cook County, then Chicago, and then the state to pass those sorts of laws. And so that is when this reaction that we're seeing from the Trump administration, both during the first Trump administration, but this administration, is a reaction to our efforts from the community to protect our own people. And so during the first Trump administration, they did, in the spring of 2018, they did large-scale enforcement. Nothing like what we're seeing now, but large-scale enforcement. In sanctuary jurisdictions, same talking points. Border Czar Tom Homan was then acting ICE director Tom Homan. Literally the rhetoric coming out was the exact same. And so in May of that year, they did a large-scale raid here in Chicago where they arrested 156 people. Obviously,
This is what year again?
2018.
18, okay.
And hello? Okay, good. And we decided, along with Organized Communities Against Deportation and ICER, Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, along with a number of brave individuals who were arrested during those raids, really put themselves on the line, filed a class action lawsuit. We didn't know where that class action lawsuit was going to go. We knew we were going to win on the law, but we didn't know what we could win as far as remedies for people. Because once someone's arrested and detained, it's very difficult to get them out of removal proceedings. So fast forward, we survive the beginning parts of that litigation that led to what ultimately was the Castellano-Nava consent decree, which we signed in May of 2022, in which, setting out for the first time in decades, even though the law had always required this, CBP has limited warrantless arrest authority. They need to have not just probable cause that you think of, probable cause that a person is a non-citizen and removable, but they also need to have probable cause that the person is likely to escape before a warrant can be obtained. And what decades of case law in the courts, decades of immigration policy have said is that if people have community ties, they have a home, they have employment, they have family, these are all indications that they do not have probable cause, that they cannot make that arrest. And so it's set out for the first time on a nationwide policy that ICE needs to be following the law, needs to make a determination of community ties before making the arrest, and need to document it. For 2 years after, it was during the end of the Biden administration, we saw general compliance. When they went out into the community, they usually targeted somebody who had a prior order of removal. They did end up getting a warrant in advance, and then they would make that arrest. Starting in January, late January, and goes back to like OCAD and others, yes, we were already organized come January 20 and learned a lot of lessons, I think, over the first couple months where the enforcement was not like it is now. Such that we had a network in place, and I can't overstate how important the rapid response networks that average Chicagoans of all races, types, and sizes from all communities have come out to be witnesses to individual arrests. It was through those rapid response that we were able to file a motion to enforce the consent decree that has now recently been extended until February 2nd of next year. And we are in the process now. The government just yesterday finally revealed publicly that they've identified from June through October 1,850 potential violations. We independently, with the help of OCAD and others, have identified 800. And that's just till October 7th. I mean, if folks have been paying attention to the news, the last 10 days have been nuts in addition. And it doesn't seem like they even care that the court had ordered this. And so we are at an inflection point with the judge trying to seek release for those people of hopefully thousands of individuals who have been unlawfully arrested over the last however many months.
I mean, let me ask a really naive question about that. To what consequence, ultimately? I mean, these violations, we know the Trump administration, as you say, doesn't care about it, especially in the short term. But like, what happens then with these massive numbers of violations that you just described?
Well, so this massive number of violations also dovetails with a new interpretation of immigration detention authority in which they are claiming that literally any immigrant who gets arrested is subject to mandatory detention, that they are not eligible for bonds. So since July, all of these arrests have led to immigrants being detained for months now in squalid conditions, whether initially at Broadview, in which they have no access to beds, no access to regular food, no access to medical, to then being shipped to faraway detention facilities. Some of them just opened on the fly. I will name the Fort Bliss detention camp right now, in which they've had torrential rainpours that every bed is soaked at the moment down there. And so the strategy that they have is, let's make these arrests. The courts will be delayed. We're going to detain everybody in the meantime, while the courts have to fight it out as to whether this is lawful. And by the way, this new detention authority has been challenged 100 times now across the United States, and the administration has won one time. So uniform, and I'm talking every state, conservative, liberal judge, you name it, everyone is saying this is an unlawful interpretation of law. But their strategy is, let's trap them all in detention and then pressure them into taking either a deportation order or voluntary departure and leave the country. And so they're trying to use the unlawful arrests to trap them in detention, to pressure them into waiving their rights to stay here. And realize that, like, in these most recent raids, these aren't generally people that have recently arrived. These are individuals that have been here decades, have businesses, have families. Learned about a mother the other day, that single mom who 3 kids, minor kids, left alone. This is not, and I don't even want to get into the rhetoric of worst of the worst, but like, this is not even nowhere remotely that. And so the goal here is to get them out. And the reason that's important is that short circuits the incentive structure for this administration. The incentive structure for this administration is trap them and then make them waive their rights, because they know if they're able to assert their rights, that the process is going to take time. Due process takes time. People's claims take time. Understanding people's lives in the United States and what they are eligible for takes time. And the administration wants to short circuit that. And so that is the goal here.
You mentioned that we're at an inflection point, and that's a perfect segue to you, Audrey, because what I really want to ask you about, you're not an expert on immigration as such, although you are an immigrant, right? Your field is political theory, and you're a critical theorist. You teach courses on fascism, among other things. And so what I want to ask you is, do you see, like, for example, the political scientist Joe Lowndes, who's a fascism scholar, a fellow fascism scholar of yours, has argued that we are, in the last few weeks, we've entered into a new phase of Trumpism, a full-blown fascist takeover, where it's not just the same old Trumpism of 1.0, but that 2.0 is now entering its full-blown maximalist program. And so, as a scholar of fascism, I'd like to ask you if you see continuities, discontinuities. How would you place this moment? How would you locate where we are at this moment in the trajectory of the Trumpian project?
Thank you. Yes, we are at an inflection point. I think we are in a phase of consolidation of a fascist regime of sorts. I think the first thing I'd like to point out, right, is that there is no sort of hard distinction between liberalism and fascism, right? There's a kind of a spectrum. I think, especially in the United States, right, capitalism always has fascist potential, and what we're witnessing now is this fascist potential. We're going from potential to actuality, and this regime is trying to consolidate, its takeover. Think of fascism as a breakdown of the liberal state, and we're seeing it, right? They're taking the sledgehammer to the federal government. They're ignoring the law. They're ignoring the Constitution. The rules of the game are changing, and we're moving into a configuration where the law doesn't apply anymore. At least it doesn't apply uniformly, and I'm sure Mark would have a lot to say about this, right? It doesn't. It's used as a tool to hit the most vulnerable members of our community, but they don't care about it. They don't follow it. They ignore it. The Supreme Court will give cover. And yeah, I mean, think of fascism as something decompositional. What we're seeing is the American state is decomposing, and the current administration is accelerating this process by destroying institutions from, the federal government, education, the entire state is being dismantled.
How would, as somebody who's studied other forms of authoritarian regimes and fascist movements, how would you compare what's happening right now in the United States with parallel experiences in Europe and elsewhere in the world?
Right, so, I mean, the fascist regimes I know best as a scholar are, of course, Nazi Germany or just European fascism in the interwar period. There are similarities, but there's also strong differences. So, some features of fascism would include, in-group and out-group thinking, so we're seeing a lot of that today.
The enemy within.
The enemy within, those people over there are not like us, they're not Americans. And this is something that really I find striking, when I read reporting about ICE in the city, and the few times you hear actual ICE personnel talk about why they're doing what they're doing, and they have no problem saying oh, they're just not American, meaning they're not human. They don't deserve, any of the protections that we expect, right? So in-group, out-group is one of the strong features of a sort of fascist political, regime. A certain kind of, irrationality or occultism or, anti-science discourse. We're seeing a lot of that. For instance, with the, Kennedy at the and the health discourse against vaccination.
Conspiracy theories.
All of this stuff is, sort of textbook fascist. And the flavor of fascism changes from country to country and time period to time period. But we're seeing a lot of this today. Other features of fascism is the just naked use of violence. Violence for the sake of violence sort of outside of the normal boundaries of the law, right? A lot of people are joining ICE just because they want to have the freedom to exert violence.
Isn't it interesting that at this very moment that the Trump administration is unleashing, intensifying its violence and its coercive apparatus, there's also an obsession on the right now with quote-unquote political violence of the left terrorism, Antifa, and it's just extraordinary. Like yesterday was one of the largest protests in U.S. history, if not the largest. There were millions of people in the streets, over 150,000 here in Chicago. I haven't followed every report, but I believe that there were 0 reports or incidents of violence. So I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on this. It's very curious to me that at the very moment that the Trump regime is unleashing a new level of violence itself on communities, and in particular cities, especially in this country. They've also decided to ramp up this obsession with leftist political violence that seems largely, if not completely, spectral in nature.
Yeah, I mean, they're trying to justify it, right? Or like part of the justification for Operation Midway Blitz is that they're hoping to create backlash so that they can then justify further militarization and further, occupation of Chicago or democratic cities. The fascists need an enemy. They need an existential enemy, and historically, like in the interwar period in the 20s and the 30s in Europe, the left was much more powerful, right? Like the German Communist Party had 250,000 members. The Social Democratic Party had 1 million members. They were implanted all over Germany. Like the left, they had militias. The left was organized in a way that the American left today just is not. But all the fascists need to do, right, is create like a plausible boogeyman to say, the far left, the anti-left, and it's far left or Antifa. And given decades of anti-communist and anti-socialist propaganda, you have a population that's primed to just sort of take it as face value and accept it. Especially if you think about the Trump base, right? They are living off a media diet that's just straight up right-wing propaganda day in, day out with no other alternative. Like, there's no other. I wouldn't be shocked if, thinking of, the Trump supporters I know personally in my life, it wouldn't surprise me if they didn't know there were protests yesterday. I don't think they would know this. Or if they do, I think they would minimize it. I don't think they would even, recognize it as a thing that happened.
Well, Trump apparently himself has followed the protests very closely and has already created this AI-generated video of himself, Right. But you're making a good point, that we're living in parallel epistemic universes in a sense.
Absolutely. I have one last thing I would like to say.
Please.
The thing about fascism, right, sort of at its core, fascism is capitalism in crisis. And you can think of liberalism as sort of a luxury belief for, a certain part of the capitalist class that can afford to be liberal as long as capitalism keeps functioning. And so when we're asking, why is it that, the fascist potential in American politics that's been there forever, arguably since the founding of the US, never forget, this is a settler colony. Why is this fascist potential now really coming to the fore and becoming the sort of dominant force in contemporary politics? And it's because American capitalism isn't doing so hot, right? And who are the people who brought Trump to power? You have various factions in American capital, but big tech, right, is looking for support and help and deregulation from the Trump administration, and they got it. Private equity, they're all if you look at it in granular detail, there are all sorts of business interests that sort of converge to help propel the Trump coalition to the second regime. Now the question is, will this coalition, it's not monolithic. There's a lot of tensions within the Trump coalition itself, and I think for me that's where we need to think about, okay, how do we drive a wedge? How do we break this coalition apart to help, sort of facilitate a transition out of this regime we're in?
I have more questions about that, but I want to turn to the audience and get people involved.
Yeah, I would like to know if the blog club, because you have reporters all over Chicago, as you talk to each other, if you have been able to get an idea of how big is the force of ICE, Border Patrol, all combined attacking Chicago. I mean, they are talking about they're going to recruit many more people. And so it's just to, for us people that are doing ICE watch work, it would be a good idea to know what, because they extend all the way to the suburbs too, so my inclination is that they are spreading themselves quite thin, unless it's spectacular kind of propaganda, things like 50 people downtown or whatever. So if you have any idea of that, it would be helpful.
Thank you for that question. So I have to say it's hard to answer that question because we as press get very little information from the administration. So every time there's a big scale raid or every time we report on a detention, we're reaching out to Border Patrol, to the Department of Homeland Security, and to ICE, asking about specifics about these operations. And in many cases I've asked, like witnesses say there were 8 to 10 or 40 to 50 patrol or agents, at this site. Can you confirm how many were there? And I don't get that question answered. So by reporting, by observing, and by what was initially reported through the state governor, through the mayor, we knew that it could be up to 200 agents around that number that were deployed to Chicago specifically. The other part that makes it hard for us to keep count of agents is that they're masked. And we haven't really seen many Border Patrol or ICE agents that are unmasked. We have seen reports of the same agents sometimes identified, maybe one day in the southwest side of Chicago and then the next day in the north suburbs, depending on their operations. And we've been able to know it's the same person based on tattoos or personal ID marks that, you can see it's a recurring agent that has been here making detentions, but it's very isolated because most agents are masked. Most agents, at some point, were starting to wear like long sleeves as well, so we couldn't tell from the tattoos. So I wish I could say a firm number. From our reporting, we haven't been able to get a grasp of that, but the initial reports that we got through the city and the state pointed to around 200 agents. It's possible that number is larger. What we do know is that whenever there's a larger action, like I'm thinking Southwest Side, Brighton Park 2 Saturdays ago, and then East Side, and then we saw Border Patrol. We had seen Border Patrol downtown. That seems to be like the largest number at a time in a specific community, but that doesn't mean other detentions are not happening throughout the city in smaller scale, where it could have been 1 or 2 people detained at one address and then somewhere else in that neighborhood a few minutes later someone else gets detained. So that's to say, even if we see a large scale operation with 40 to 50 agents, that doesn't mean all agents are there, because we do know other people are getting detained throughout multiple neighborhoods or suburbs.
Did you want to add anything to that, Shannon?
I think it was just they also seem to be having to borrow each other's license plates. They don't have enough license plates to go around. And to like who benefits, I think it is pointing to the fact that there's a few people, not us, we're not benefiting, the working class is not benefiting, our neighbors are not benefiting, but it's the corporations. Every time you put someone in system detention facilities, you're talking the food commissary, the phone commissary, the ankle monitor, the tracking, and I also, when I say like a lot of times it's the immigrant community, the black and brown community they're testing pilot programs of surveillance. Like it was under Biden that we started hearing about the border, their DNA being collected. So it makes me feel like, when is it gonna come, to our neighborhoods? I think we see them deploying a lot of technology and trying it out. So I think that's just like, why do we see the increase? It's because there's a private interest on this.
So, and some people have called this the deportation industrial complex, right? The emerging complex, or the deportation machine. And there's clearly a political economy of that. But getting back to Audrey's point about contradictions and fault lines within the block that we're up against, I mean, it's also the case that there is an element of capital that is against all of this stuff. They want cheap labor. There have been, especially in certain industries, agriculture, meat packing, restaurant work, there are certain industries where the captains of industry are begging the Trump administration to stop this stuff because they won't have any workers.
They want cheap indentured labor. Right, I mean, like something like 50% of the U.S. agricultural system relies on migrant labor. for, picking up strawberries, like back-breaking work in some, out in the sun all day, every day, like in conditions that are extremely difficult. People are, like, they get their passports taken away when they come in, and they're, like, treated like absolute garbage. But there was a sort of, this has been going on for decades, right? It's not a new problem. What if the Trump administration is doing in this case is sort of breaking the deal, right, that capital has with the state? Because why are employers able to employ migrant labor, undocumented migrants for decades? Why now? Why? I guess what I'm trying to get at is, why is it that the employers are not prosecuted, but the labor is, and now are at risk of deportation?
Right.
Like, there's a dirty little secret here, right? Is that, like, immigration has, or the fact that U.S. industry relies on migrant labor, undocumented migrant labor, is something that is not new, that has been tolerated for decades, and now it's become.
That's right. And there's long been a tension within the Republican Party and on the American right between the so-called open borders, Wall Street, big business, libertarian capitalist wing of the party, the country club Republicans, and the nativist, xenophobic, anti-immigrant, deportation, pro-deportation wing of the party. There's always been a tension. And the last several Republican presidents before Trump were technically, officially, pro-immigration, right? From Ronald Reagan, who's now seen retrospectively by the MAGA right as horribly pro-immigrant, that he allowed amnesty, quote unquote, and George W. Bush, and so on and so forth. These are viewed, and the general position of the Republican Party was essentially pro-immigration, meaning not that they loved immigrants or believed in their human rights, but rather that they wanted this supply of labor for business, for corporate reasons. But now, with the rise of MAGA, and frankly, the reason that Trump won the nomination, there just wasn't anyone in the Republican Party at the level of president, running for president, that actually articulated the nativist, xenophobic, anti-immigrant position until Trump did. And what we discovered is that that's the majority position of the base. The pro-immigration position was not that's the position of the elites in the Republican Party, but not the base. Trump represents the base in that sense. So that would be my answer to your question of why now? What has shifted? I think that it represents a genuine, represents, this shift now reflects, the position of the Republican Party now more accurately reflects the base, whereas it didn't before. I'm not saying you have to respond to that, by the way. I'm just putting it out there. I know there are lots of other questions. Okay.
Mark, you mentioned that the goal is deportation and also detention. My question is, if the detention centers are profit-driven, why isn't the ultimate goal detention and not deportation?
Well, they kind of go hand in hand in the sense that they don't want any immigrant to actually be able to stay. And so the way you do that is you put them in worse and worse conditions, more crowded conditions in detention. Well, they're going to continue to profit from that. They can't hold them forever if there's going to be a process. And so the strategy at the moment is, because it's, let's face it, it's not a mass detention, it's a mass deportation, right? And they want as efficiently as possible for people to leave the country, one way or another, whether it's, these silly incentives that if you self-deport, we'll give you $1,000 or whatever, or like the undocumented immigrant children who are held have been recently offered, minors have been recently offered $2,500 to give up their rights, and then threatened with, detention once they turn 18 and threats against their parents if they don't accept, this offer. And so I think at the end of the day, the goal is as efficiently as possible, with the highest numbers possible, to have people leave the country, whether it's by deportation, voluntary departure, or self-deportation. And so I think that the detention piece of it right at the moment is a strategy to really coerce people, frankly, into giving up their rights and their ability to stay here. And so, yeah, I don't think the administration itself has the goal of detention, but really using that as the tool to get as many people out as possible and as quickly as possible.
What do we know about how that's actually playing out? I mean, it's still early, but like, what's the vibe on the street? This is a question for any of you. As, you know, Francia, I'm thinking in terms of your reporting, or Xanat, in terms of like, you know, immigrant communities you're working with closely every day. What are people saying about that? Are there, what is the conversation within immigrant communities about, well, what should we do? I mean, the Trump administration is forcing this choice that Mark just described. How are people thinking about that and coping with it?
I think I have this conversation within myself daily. I think as a displaced person, I wasn't here by choice, and I would love to be able to have grown up with my cousins and my aunts and my grandparents, and yet we make the survival choice every single time. And so I think it frustrating, you know, we'll give you $1,000, but that is ignoring the reason why people were displaced to begin with, and just having a place to breathe. And then I do think sometimes the conditions being exacerbated in the US are to the extent whether should I just go back to the violence I was experiencing, and that's just a more familiar type of violence than the one I'm experiencing here. I think that's the struggle of a displaced community. You gotta figure out survival. Yeah, I think it's a continuous situation, and as we talk about this being in a spectrum, I think we've been in the spectrum for generations. I mean, to begin with, the reason we have displaced people in the US and Chicago is because of the exploitation of our homes. And so it's always been that tension. I think as we saw Trump win, it was like, again, it's another every single day evaluation of where can I exist a little bit better. So yeah, it's sad to know that some people, I know we heard of some people that, and I talked to loved ones of, they had their bags ready and they were on the way back to their home country and they were detained by ICE. And so it's like, if you knew that person was going to leave, yet you put them in the system again to profit and just cause the pain, like, what's the point, right? No, sometimes it's really frustrating, day after day, and you're like, what's the point of this pain? Like, my head logically can't understand some of what the point is, but it seems so incomprehensible. But again, it's the pitting of us for some individuals to get away with their own wants.
Francia, did you want to add anything to that about that conversation or thought process going on?
Yes, I'll say, you know, through my reporting, I speak to a number of people who have been impacted in different ways, and like Xanat said, it's a spectrum, but people have to make choices that sometimes protect their families, even if that means they have to sacrifice a little bit of their own well-being and safety. And I'm thinking of the case of somebody in Gage Park. He's a father of 3 U.S. citizens that I recently reported on. He was at a landscaping job while he was detained. He was in near Little Village when he was detained. And I spoke with his sister, who created a GoFundMe to raise funds for legal defense. And she had talked to him periodically, not very often, but he was pretty defeated, very worried about his kids. She was really eager to find a lawyer and get some legal defense going. and he was kept in Broadview for a few days, and then he was under the impression he would be moved to Oklahoma, but was moved to a Michigan detention center instead. And while he was there, he was able to talk to his sister again, and she told me the conditions were not great, as Mark has said, and it's no secret. And he was really eager to stay and fight his case because of his kids, because he provides for his kids, because they are minors and he wants to be there for them. And that possibly wouldn't be the choice he would make if he didn't have kids. That's what his sister said. This case really struck out because she had talked to him, she knew he was detained, and a few days later after she knew he was detained, the Department of Homeland Security posted a video on X, these videos that you've probably seen that are very like
Stylized.
And she saw his brother getting moved into a car in a small clip of that video. And the video caption and in the video itself, the administration said something like, tag it, zip it, take it down, as people are getting detained, referring to the people who are getting detained as objects. So she was struck by that too. She shared the video and she said, you know, my brother appears there. So it's really,
Wow.
it's really a complicated situation for those who are detained, but also their families, because they're navigating this and they're sometimes in survival mode, trying to get their loved ones defended or, you know, out, and trying to provide for those who are left behind, like his kids, and trying to figure out what they can do as this is playing out.
Okay, so again, thank you so much for the discussion. It's really great hearing these at different levels. Yeah, I have two kind of questions. I guess maybe the first is about, I think back to the COVID era, and there was a certain sort of like gain in labor, increased unionization. You know, I think some of this stuff with some of the additional support that came through, seemed like there was a kind of renewed push back against employers that came about during the COVID era, and I guess I'm kind of curious about how much some of this is in part an alliance or reaction with capital and the government to kind of basically reestablish regimes of hierarchy and, you know, kind of reestablish some sort of lower class or lower class of people that can kind of be conditioned with impunity, but also then sort of set a break in the existing sort of like classes as well, where they can identify themselves as not the other. So maybe it's kind of a bit of a question about labor. The other one I'm kind of curious about is maybe the opposite side of this, and I'm curious, yeah, the other part of this maybe, I'm curious about the difference between local reporting and what you're seeing happen on the national level, because things like, I mean, you look at the New York Times reporting, for example, on, you know, King's protests, and they say it's back page, thousands show up. Like, do you feel like, I guess, especially, I guess this is a question for, you know, the Block Club, Francesca, do you feel like you have any sort of relationship with colleagues on national level, or is there a complete disconnect and breakdown in any sort of communication there? And I mean, I guess there's this other sort of maybe alliance going on there with the media too, and the government as well. But I don't, it's maybe just trailing off, but thank you.
I can take that last question. There is a difference in how local newsrooms report compared to national newsrooms, because we have been here for a long time and we have the relationships with community members and neighbors and officials, and we know the context of neighborhoods, and we know how it's been, like the history of those neighborhoods and how they've struggled and how they've organized and how they've resisted in the past, or what are some of the tensions that existed in the past. So there is a difference there. There's also an increasing collaborative nature between newsrooms. So Block Club, it has collaborated with Borderless in the past, and we have, as a group, we have a collective, like a video repository where people can send in clips about detentions, and this includes several newsrooms, the Tribe, the Southside Weekly, Injustice Watch, Block Club, Borderless, to name a few, where like if people send out those clips, they're sent to a shared repository, and we can all use those videos for reporting or for documenting purposes. So at the local level, we're seeing that change because we understand the value of having people who are from Chicago, who know Chicago and who know the neighborhoods, and that can do that reporting. At the national level, I wouldn't say we're totally disconnected, but there's not that same level of collaboration. And Chicago is right now like in the news in the same way that LA was in the news a few months ago, and that Portland is also in the news right now. And we see more national journalists maybe staying here or visiting and reporting more. But oftentimes we also see that they rely on also local reporting because they don't have that full knowledge and context or maybe connections to. And I'm even thinking internationally. A few months back, a German journalist had reached out to me saying, we're trying to report about what's happening in the United States. And like we would like to connect with local outlets. So she was connecting with some folks in DC, and she had reached out to me here in Chicago and Block Club and I think a few other newsrooms. And if she was going to report elsewhere, she was going to do the same. So there is a little bit of, I think that shows the importance of local reporting, and many of us, even if we are not always collaborating, I think our reporting can be a reference for other national or international journalists, just because we have that knowledge and we've been here before. So we were in a way prepared to do this reporting. Not to say we anticipated everything that we're seeing on the ground today, but we knew that we understood communities and we had relationships with sources, and that's incredibly valuable.
Did anyone want to add anything to that or address the other question that Josh asked?
I would just add to that. Because I talk to both local and national media quite often, and I think one thing that's very, very striking right now is because it's part of the strategy, this just volume of actions by this administration. And so, like, for example, the South Shore apartment raid. I don't think people realize how spectacularly unconstitutional and unprecedented in my 20 years of doing this work that raid was. And so we would talk to like the New York Times or say Washington Post, and they want to do one article about it, and Greg Bavino, the commander at large, comes with 300 officers, all with high-powered rifles, all in military garb, with the FBI, and everyone wants to talk about the Black Hawk helicopters that dropped down and they broke through all the doors and zip-tied everyone. But that's kind of where it stopped. But then the local news kind of picked up from there. It was like, oh, wait a second. They never had a criminal warrant. No one bothered to get a criminal warrant. Oh, wait a second. We've been at the courthouse. No one's been presented for any criminal prosecution. Oh, wait a second. They claim Tren del Agua, but they haven't produced leave aside whether that is even a lawful basis of any sort, given that like conservative courts have said, we don't care if you say it's Tren del Agua and you want to use the Alien Entities Act. That's not a proper use of that law. But they haven't even produced any evidence of that. And they just want to move on. And yet here we have a situation where they use flashbang grenades at 1 a.m, use Black Hawk helicopters against U.S. citizens and immigrants alike, rappelled onto the roof, all with high-powered rifles with laser pointers on the front of them. And by the way, we have a number of clients who had this done to them in a smaller raid a number of days or weeks before that. They smashed down the door with the flashbang grenades and then smashed down every apartment door that they could get to inside there, zip-tied U.S. citizens, immigrants alike, and only then started to ask any questions. I mean, it is just breathtaking. Like, that is not, there are at least 5 different constitutional violations there. And we're supposed to just move on.
Were you about to say something about that, Audrey?
Yeah, I mean, I don't pretend to know what ICE is thinking about or what the government is thinking about, but looking at that raid, it's pretty clear to me that the goal is spectacle.
Yes.
Yep.
Right? The goal is their base. Like, they want to be able to show, like, cool images of soldiers with rifles and a helicopter to the base, right? This is because probably that cost millions of dollars, I'm assuming, like to just monopolize, that many resources for one raid on one building. The goal is spectacle because one of, sort of the standard kind of definitions of fascism from Walter Benjamin, who was also himself a victim of fascism in the 30s and 40s, is that fascism is a form of the aesthetization of politics, right? Aesthetics and spectacle is crucially important to this administration, precisely because it cannot deliver on the promises it made to its base. It will deliver on some of those promises, like terrorizing migrants and enforcing a restrictive social agenda, but it cannot deliver on the economic promises that it made. And in fact, between the tariffs and the dollar and everything going on in the economy right now, the financial crisis that's on the horizon, it needs the spectacle. The Trump administration absolutely needs the spectacle. Otherwise, people are going to start asking questions about their pension funds, or the fact that they can't get healthcare anymore, or inflation, or the fact that they cannot buy houses. So then part of the anti-fascist strategy would be to prevent them from using those images of spectacle, which is why the frogs were really cool in recent weeks, right? Because part of it is to sort of impede the narrative, right?
Yeah, and I was going to say that particular episode that you've talked about, Mark, and there was one in Elgin also. That was the one you were referring to, right?
Mm-hmm.
So these are probably a harbinger of more to come, right? And I want to just, make it clear that although there is a temporary block on the National Guard troops being deployed, they're here. They're actually at the various bases that they've been assembled at. But they haven't been deployed into the streets yet because of Governor Pritzker's lawsuit and the city's lawsuit against the deployment. But it will, if it gets, correct me if I'm wrong, you're the lawyer here, but if it goes up to the Supreme Court, it's almost guaranteed that it'll go the Trump administration's way, right?
It is at the Supreme Court now, and we'll find out. This is going to sound really naive 2 or 3 months from now, but I gotta hope that it's a little different this time. That we have not given them the pushback that they need to pretextually. They have been so provocative in trying the aggression, leave my ticky-tacky legal violations to one side. The brutality and cruelty and carelessness with which they are doing this for the purpose of getting people in the streets to react so that they can send in the National Guard. I think for the most part, Chicagoans have defended themselves, but have held the line in that regard. And I guess I gotta hope that it turns out differently.
Has the Supreme Court done anything? Has it put up any roadblocks against any of these? The agenda of the administration in this respect?
Not yet.
Okay. Let's get to somebody who actually lives in South Shore, 3 blocks from that building.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to talk about that. I have a 2-level question. So strategically, I wanted to ask Audrey specifically, you made reference to wedges, to place wedges between them with the strategy to win. What does that look like? Wedges between which groups? And then on the street level, for the whole panel, there's a concept of the hunters, people who misrepresent themselves as ICE and are taking advantage and criminalizing people. What kind of numbers does that run into? Is it just fringe, or is it a growing concern, and is that moving us closer to someone defending themselves and justifying releasing the troops in the streets?
I don't have I wish I had a 10-step guide to defeating fascism in 2025 with precise instructions. I'm sorry to disappoint. I think, just more generally, There's a base that's fully, completely, entirely indoctrinated, and those people are just not reachable, or at least at this point. But there's a whole group of people who have voted for Donald Trump for various reasons, because they bought the story for various reasons, that could be peeled off the coalition, right? And those fights are going to have to be fought everywhere, all at once, in churches, in school, in higher ed, in journalism, and yeah, that's I guess that would be my overall strategic conceit, right? Is like fascism is a mass movement, or it needs to present itself as a mass movement, right? And like part of the strategy today is to show that it is not in fact a mass movement, that the majority of Americans is against this for various reasons, are absolutely shocked and find it abhorrent what's happening. And I think we need to show that they're not a majority, right? And part of that, part of the strategy is, because like this administration, right? You have the loyalists, you have Trump, you have the loyalists, all the people he puts in power in every agency he can possibly put these people in power. But there's an entire state and bureaucratic apparatus, right, that is sort of going along, right? And so how do you peel off that support? Like, how do you get those people to jump ship? How do you get the judges, right? Judges are not leftists, generally speaking, right? Like how...
Judges?
Judges, in general.
No, I mean, come on, it's about the law.
Yeah.
Sorry. I mean, the whole concept of being a judge is conservative.
Yeah, it's super conservative, but like how do you get like people who are not radical leftists, not Marxists, to put up resistance at every level, to make their the project fail, right? As for the different factions of capital, I'm not sure, where exactly to put pressure, or if we have room to put pressure. But I will say this: like American capitalism is remarkably unstable right now, and also the big question mark for me that is a more long-term, perspective is climate change. The big difference between classical fascism and the current iteration of fascism is the climate question is a real question mark. And I think in the next 5-10 years, we're about to see climate problems really become like central and exponentially so. And we've only very barely begun to see how this is going to impact us. Like the insurance crisis in Florida is something that I follow really closely. If property rights is one of the fundamental values in American society, including for the fascists, what happens if you can't insure your house anymore? Meaning you can't sell it. Meaning you're paying a mortgage on something that is virtually worthless. So there are like deep currents in the American economy that are at work, and I'm interested in observing. And I will say this: fascism is not inevitable. Right? We're in a bad moment, we're at an inflection point, but the outcome is not inevitable, and it is not stable. And there are ways to try to short circuit what they're attempting to do.
Andy.
Well, we sort of had a start of a question here, start of an answer. I'm going to make it much more basic, which is we've got a situation where we had 4 great court decisions on or about the 10th of this month. By my count, at least 2 of them were blatantly ignored subsequent to that. And clearly, I think the courts have failed us. The politicians, including our local ones, I would argue, have failed us because we've had the Illinois State Police wantonly arresting nonviolent protesters, and yet, of course, we've got a whole series of patently illegal actions taking place right in front of local police forces, and there are no arrests. So my question to everyone, frankly, is how do we win? That seems to me the basic question we must answer, especially in the failure of the state at every single level to respond to the wanton illegality. And I would just say, in terms of the divisions above us, clearly they've circled the wagons against the rest of us. So I have very little faith in one or another wing of the state saving us, or one or another wing of capitalism saving us, because frankly, this administration, in so many respects, cutting off talented foreign labor, etc., is truly digging the grave of capitalism here in the United States. And I would just argue that, frankly, that capitalism in the United States has been doing pretty well in comparison to the rest of the world for the most part. So the crisis here, I don't think, is anywhere near as pronounced as it is in many other areas of the world that have far less growth.
Which is why you have divisions, for example, and debates within MAGA over things like the H-1B visa program, right? Between the Elon Musk, Steve Bannon debate over visas, for example. There are different wings, even within MAGA, about how far to push this anti-immigrant agenda. Did anybody want to respond to Andy's point? I mean, I think it circles back a little bit to something that you said in our interview, Xanat, about relying on one another rather than the state. And I saw that, Andy, on social media that you actually had an exchange with Marguerite about that exact point, because she said yesterday, the No Kings, it feels different to protest in Brandon Johnson's Chicago than it did at previous points, right? And you kind of pushed back on that and said, yeah, not necessarily.
Not regarding the DNC, certainly.
Right. So I'm just wondering if, Xanat, if you have any thoughts on that, or any other related topics.
Yeah, a lot of things come to mind, so I'm going to try to make sense. But it starts with part of the things that we're doing in response to this moment is increasing our capacity to answer the hotline, the FSN, Family Support Network. Starts with the 855. And we usually get calls from folks that are, feel vulnerable. I think everybody that calls feels vulnerable. Even the racists that have increased their calls to us. But now we're starting to hear from U.S. citizens asking us what are their rights and whether they should carry proof of their citizenship. And it goes back to part of the point is the fear and submission and compliance of the masses, which I think it takes time for us to recognize that we're more than the people that are trying to squash us. And so to me, it goes with, I skipped to this, Tom Homan saying that Chicago was difficult because we're well educated, and what he's saying is that we're well educated on a constitutional right. That in uncomfortable numbers for these institutions, we are likely to defend our rights, right? And so the spectacle is so that we give up those rights. Maybe we don't want to go to Broadview. A lot of U.S. citizens have now had to experience Broadview, which is a ICE processing center, for the first time.
One of the most iconic images to come out of Broadview is the white pastor being shot in the head with a pepper ball.
And prior to that, it was Gladys who had to spend 3 days without a bed there. Now we hear like you just get 1 or 2 water bottles a day, if any. But I think it's the compliance, the expectation that we'll just, out of fear of that experience, we will just comply with whatever they propose from the top down. And so I think it is, some of our conversations as networks is like, we're seeing them get more violent towards us, and then the question is, what are we willing to absorb? What are we to defend the basic rights that we come to believe, right? So it goes back to solidarity, acting as a group that cares for each other, because I think that's the only way we survive this, by caring for the other. When a U.S. citizen is thinking about carrying proof of citizenship, I hope they're thinking of the other person that cannot carry that, and that by providing that, you're okaying, 1, your right to not have to provide that, and 2, you're okaying the other person being singled out and brought to Broadview for torture. So I think it's like, what actions are we willing, what are we willing to absorb? And I say this again as a person that continuously has to think about survival, right? What will I do to just make it and be safe? But I think if the more of us are willing to protect our basic rights, maybe the fear instigators, the cruelty instigators have less power. And maybe we can, thrive in different ways.
Our work is to really share what we see people doing here in Chicago. So I can't take credit for the thousands of people who are mobilizing in Chicago, but we are getting tips and tips and tips of how do I help, or like I saw this article about neighbors putting together whistle kits to give out in their neighborhoods. Do you know where I can get the resources and do the same? Or I'm organizing like a taste of Bellman-Cragen for neighbors to show up at businesses that have seen less people walk through their doors because they're afraid of going out, or workers showing up to work. So as we're doing this work, we're also seeing the response, and like many messages, I'm really happy to say that like many messages of support from people who read our work and are like, this is important because you're also telling us how people are responding. And like I said, it's not, I can't take credit for any of that. We just see tips, we just see action, and we report about it. But increasingly what I hear from people participating in events, or going out in their bikes and buying out street vendors, or showing up for a detained street vendor who now has no means of income, is detained, their family is left without a family member, but now they see neighbors taking over that stand, or the Street Vendors Association of Chicago raising $300,000 to give out to street vendors who are impacted. So there's a lot of that we're seeing, where a lot of people who maybe were not as involved in that work are now seeking ways to plug in, or organizing to do school watch at let-out time. So there's so much that we're also seeing, and I think that's part of the answer. Like, people are finding answers to this big question at the level that they can, in the way that they can, and it's part of the story too, as we see. And hopefully, I can say in some cases we've seen that sharing a story has inspired somebody else in another part of the city to do the same, and it's not because of us, but it's because of the organizers who are doing that work, or the neighbors, or the volunteers, or all of these people who are responding that question in their own ways.
And if I'm not mistaken, like, there a lot of the videos that people are taking, just bystanders and spontaneously people taking out their cameras when ICE is harassing people in their neighborhood. They take these videos, and some of them are ending up with Block Club Chicago, right? And are becoming part of your sort of archive that you can then use to tell those stories. Correct me if I've got that wrong.
No, that's right. We get tips from neighbors, we get tips from organizers, we get videos sent, and like you said, there's a website that people can go to. I think it's bit.ly/Chicago journalists, where people can submit videos, and it goes to this repository where a lot of newsrooms have access to. So if it's not Block Club Chicago, it might be some other local newsroom that can pick up that video and report about it. And it's important for our work, because we can't, unfortunately, we don't have eyes everywhere 24/7 to know exactly everything that happened and then report on it. It's just not possible.
The only thing I was going to add is those videos also make it into the court cases. I mean, we have submitted at least 8 or 9 videos. We have to be selective, but they have been submitted as part of it for certain emblematic stories. I wanted to just address the court decisions and blatant defiance of them. Look, the courts are not going to save us, but they are going to be an important harm mitigation tool. We're in a different time than even the first Trump administration, where even during the first Trump administration you could get an order and they would comply with it almost immediately. And so I think we need to set expectations of, when we hear that there's a good court order, that's the beginning of the fight in the courts. And there is grueling work, including after this, that I need to do to realized that victory. So on the October 7th, they've been brazenly violating it since then. We know that. It's not lost on us, but we need to do it methodically, step by step. And the courts, under the best of circumstances, are slow, and we're in the worst of circumstances right now when you have a federal government that is just ignoring decisions unless really the screws are put to them.
Mark and I were talking a little bit about what happens with the National Guard. It's at the Supreme Court now, and we'll see what happens. But let's say the National Guard, and that's on a state-by-state basis, right? The Trump administration it's not a blanket thing. Can they say in each case, like the governor of Oregon has a case against the Trump administration, right? The governor of Illinois. So let's say this happens. Let's say there are National Guard troops in Illinois and Oregon and elsewhere. How does that change the equation versus where we are now? Does that intensify? Are we now talking about a partial martial law situation? Are we looking at more violence in the streets? Are we looking at more resistance? Is that more likely to provoke people into, acts that can then be portrayed as violent, resistance of federal authority, etc.? Is this, and then one other aspect of that is, what's the end game here? I mean, we've heard so many overlapping and conflicting messages from the administration about why this is all happening in the first place. It's because these cities are crime infested. We have to stop all the crime. It's out of control. They're war zones. It's because of all the immigrants. We have a crisis. We have to get the bad hombres, the worst of the worst. We have to get all the gang members, etc., etc. And then it's the protesters, because the protesters are out of control. So it's just this kind of jambalaya of messaging about different levels of troops that have to be sent, whether it's ICE, National Guard. So I guess my question is to all of you, what is the end game here? Like, Mark, I think you kind of hinted at it by saying they want people to leave. They want people to either self-deport or they want to make their lives so uncomfortable. But then there's the other question of, our own governor, Pritzker, said he thinks that this is being done to normalize the presence of military troops in cities, particularly in blue cities and states, for purposes of intimidating voters for 2026 and beyond.
Yeah, let me just react from the immigration enforcement side of it, because I don't think the National Guard piece is about the immigration enforcement side of it. It is more about that project of intimidating voters, because so like for my day-to-day work, the National Guard is more of a side issue, because at least under the current law, or their attempts to follow the current law, National Guard is not authorized in these scenarios to do immigration enforcement. So they are being brought out to guard, federal properties, and frankly, have never played, even in Los Angeles, didn't play a role in the enforcement. And even in DC, they were really kind of because DC is unique because it's a federal district. They were really alongside ICE and CBP and the FBI, and not really out front doing enforcement. And so it's a bit of a sideshow for the enforcement side of things, but I don't think it's a sideshow as far as what is the larger project, as far as normalizing militarization in large cities. Because otherwise, I don't understand what the ration. There has to be a reason why he knows that they can't do the enforcement, or at least they haven't chosen to break the law in that way. So that there must be a reason why he wants it, and I have to believe it's a political reason, and is really directed at the American public and not immigration. It's about interaction with U.S. citizens and people, that ties to politics and elections.
Audrey, do you want to offer any thoughts on that? I mean, is that just part of a? I mean, think back to the way Trump first rolled this out. He put all of these things together. If you remember the "Shypocalypse Now" meme, where he declared war on the city of Chicago. That was 2 days before Operation Midway Blitz started, and it was an AI-generated image of himself as Lieutenant Colonel Kilgore from the Francis Ford Coppola movie Apocalypse Now, and it was Trump as Kilgore saying, "I love the smell of deportations in the morning," a play on the Kilgore line, "I love the smell of napalm in the morning." And then the second line, "Chicago is about to find out why it's called the Department of War." So you have this clusterfuck of messaging of it's about war, it's about deportations, it's about violence, it's also a celebration. Speaking of the aestheticization of politics, this is an explicit reference to a sadistic fascist phantasmagoria that he's then projecting in a fun way, in a way that's meant to entertain and excite people. So how do you think about all of these layers of like ICE, National Guard, all these, what is the end game here?
I mean, I think I agree with Mark's assessment about it. I mean, ICE really is like a rogue agency out there to just terrorize, brutalize people, right? It seems to me, not being an expert, that ICE is more dangerous. I mean, I'm more scared of ICE than I am of the National Guards. But yeah, like and we saw it, was it a week and a half ago, right, there, when they summoned all the generals, right, to, from everywhere in the world, and there was this, insane talk by, what's his name? Hexat. And, what they're trying to do, and I don't know if they're going to succeed, but what they're trying to do now is get the military on their side, right? They're testing out, they're trying to see if the military is going to follow in preparation for potential unrest, in the next 2, 3, 5 years, 10 years down the line. They're trying to mobilize the entire repressive apparatus, the military machine of the United States, to turn it back on its own people. Is that going to be successful? I'm not sure. They're projecting a lot, right? A lot of this is theater. How much of it is bluff?
Right.
And will the actual military follow? I mean, the thing about the National Guards, right, is you sign up for the National Guards. You don't sign up for the National Guards in the way you sign up for ICE. When you sign up for ICE, you're like, I'm going in because I want to brutalize people. I mean, at this point, right? The people who are signing up for ICE are in it for the violence. The National Guard seems to be a little different.
And I'm glad you mentioned that bizarre gathering that where Hexat summoned generals and admirals from bases all over the world to Quantico to, basically him and Trump gave this song and dance and chastised them for their weight and things like that. And then Trump said in his rambling speech that he wanted to use the military, wanted to use U.S. cities as a training ground for the U.S. military. He said that very explicitly and very casually. And Hexat used a phrase in his speech to the generals and admirals. He used the phrase, "move out and draw fire," which I didn't actually know what that meant, but Evan Osnos, the journalist, in a recent podcast said he picked up on that. He said, this is a phrase that Hexat would have learned as a young officer. It means that you mobilize, you get moving as a unit, and then you draw fire from the other side, from the enemy, so as to generate the conflict, to essentially hasten the events that you expect. And in a sense, he said, what you see happening right now is the Trump administration is moving out and drawing fire in American cities, trying to elicit the very conflict that they believe will provide the predicate on which to then take the political steps to establish a greater sense of emergency, the political architecture of emergency.
I guess one interesting sort of comparison is sort of traditional fascism, right? It's the endpoint of fascism is war. But in Nazi Germany, it's war against other countries, right? Against, because we want to expand the German, sphere across Europe, for instance. In this case, the endpoint of American fascism, what they're looking for is a civil war. And that's a very different thing. That's a very specific, or at least, that's a new, we're in unknown territory, and is there, to what degree are they going to be able to push this?
This is indeed the question. Nicole. This is great.
Do you know what legal challenges have been made to the Mayor of Broadview's ordinance for curfew and physical space for protesting? And I have one more. What is probably to you guys? What would you say to someone living in the collar colonies of, or sorry, the collar suburbs?
Freudian slip. Sign of the times.
Say collar colonies. Berwyn, Cicero, Oak Park, Franklin Park, who want to get involved and help? Like, do you have like an elevator speech, like a place they can go to that we could tell them, a website, you know, there's so many people want to help and it's overwhelming, all of the organizations that are there, so.
Xanat?
I think at this point, a lot of neighborhoods in Illinois are getting organized, and so there's definitely, I bet, already groups of neighbors organizing in those spaces. How public they are, it's a spectrum of that. So with that, I would say we have the Know Your Right cards that have ICER on it, and it's one of the groups that we're trying to connect with, so that then you get connected with those neighbors.
Just so people aren't confused, when you say ICER, you're not talking about ICE. You're talking about the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights. Somebody said ICER to me the other day, and I had never heard it said that way. I had only seen it in writing. So I was like, wait, what? So I just wanted to make sure people understand that.
Yeah, I would say go to their website. There's ways to plug in. We're trying to coordinate the connections that are made because a lot of people are organizing, and the places yet you named, they have community organizing already.
And yeah, I would just second that because I don't know if we intended it this way, but like the infrastructure of the interconnectedness from the legal to the policy to the rapid response to the like getting referrals for direct representation is all kind of flowing through ICER and OCAD and the Family Support Network Hotline. So, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, if you look at the experience of LA, DC, the mayors roll over and they put their own police forces to do the job of ICE. I don't expect it to be different here in Illinois and in Chicago. So what is important, people were speaking before as to the issue of, how do we move forward, how do we push back in the most productive way, is by organizing ourselves. The fact is that we will see Pritzker and Mayor Johnson at some point telling people don't protest, don't push back because they're going to bring in the National Guard. And that's essentially telling you advocate your right to self-defense. I'm Puerto Rican, and they will have to take me kicking and screaming.
And I think it goes to the point of the comfortable argument that they make, when I say Pritzker and Johnson, is the criminality, right? What happened? You're supposed to go with the criminals, but the crisis has existed in the U.S. and prior to maybe the comfort level of using the immigrant as the disposable, it was the criminal legal system, right? The reason it's so easy to pin people against each other is because it's already comfort level on like who's disposable. And I think that's one thing that as OCAD we've learned while we were getting to know and determining our values and our strategies was we cannot fall in this good immigrant, bad immigrant, good human, bad human, because then we're already conceding to a lot. And so, yeah, I think it's important to not buy into the rhetoric and okaying this pain if you already crossed the criminal legal system, because it's just a continuation of the oppression. It's a continuation of the disposability.
I was thinking about that the other day, that exact thing with respect to something that I think Mark touched on, which is that we don't know the exact number, but a certain number of U.S. citizens have been rounded up and detained, and I think most of them have been released. But ProPublica just did a big national level investigation that showed, I believe, more than 200, I can't remember the exact number, but it was a significant number. Not
It was 185.
Okay, so near 200, non-trivial number of U.S. citizens have been rounded up. And I saw on social media, there's kind of like to your point, Xanat, like a lot of people are saying like, okay, let's not emphasize who's a citizen and who's not. The point is that human beings are being terrorized. And then the counter argument to that is yes, but it just to point this out is not to say that the U.S. citizens have more value or should have more legal rights, but that this just points out the utter like fascist criminality that they're even. It's become they've escalated the repressive mechanisms to such an extent that they don't even care anymore. So I'm wondering, on the level of sort of the ethics of solidarity, if you will, how you think about that question of should we emphasize people's status and citizenship? Should we avoid that? Is something like showing the ProPublica thing, is it a way of exposing the criminality of this operation? Is it useful or is it actually damaging? That's a question to any of you, but Xanat in particular, if you want to share your thoughts on that.
I mean, the experiment of using buildings and jails, detention centers, as now expanding who is vulnerable to these buildings and these tactics by the state is expanding. And I think we have been normalizing who it is okay for, and I think it's important for all of us to push back on that. We know that jails have never been a solution or a way that creates community safety. But we know that in practicing mutual aid and resources sharing, that creates safety. So all to say that, yeah, I think we have to start questioning the pushbacks that we sometimes put, because sometimes it kind of gives away on like what we've been taught to okay and to normalize. I think by thinking the word criminal is very different the definition is very different for each of us. That's one thing, and I think it's very easy to then for the politicians to use that different definition to push their agenda on us and that expectation. So when they're saying like we're only going for the criminals, I'm a criminal because I broke a law that I don't think it's moral or just, but it's a law that was created to protect certain interests or to so I think that's one thing, that the word criminal is used so conveniently, strategically, to allow certain comfort levels for each of us and what we're willing to accept. And sometimes that looks like picking up the single mom selling tamales. Does that, for that agent, or those 6 agents picking her up, that's a criminal. Maybe it's not for you, but by the law, So I guess it's like challenging what we have come to normalize in our minds, and accept that is the strategy to make, each of us think the other is disposable.
I have a pretty short comment. So, the promise fascism makes to the base, to the regular folks who just kind of go along with it, is we're going to put the brown people back in the fields, and we're going to put the gay people back in the closet, and we're going to put the women back in the kitchen. That's the offer fascism makes to the base, to the middle class, lower class white folks who are going along with this. And I think when you try to explain what's happening, and when you try to develop a counter discourse in order to resist it, sometimes emphasizing things like citizenship or the fact that they're breaking the law might work, especially if you're talking to an audience of people who are committed, like truly committed liberals who think the law is very important. But I think in our discourses, I think we always need to get back to this point, which is that the offer fascism makes is one that's patriarchal, that's racial, that's against all kinds of differences. And if we can really show the extent to which this project is racially motivated and misogynistic and heteronormative in all the ways. If we can really show all of this, then we can start building a coalition across all those differences against this project.
So here's a related question. Here's an example, and I love your thoughts on this. One potential wedge group that's been thrown out there is first responders. The this ICE and Border Patrol operations have actually, how many cops have been tear gassed? And there was that more than one incident? There was at least one incident where a group of, I think, 20 cops or something like that. If you have the details, please correct me. But there was a group of cops that were tear gassed. Apparently it was accidental, but it hardly surprising. But more importantly, there's like, there's the federalization, the federal takeover of these operations has meant that a lot of cops are being downsized and sidelined, and first responders. And so now there's even rhetoric of like J.B. Pritzker and other governors are saying, well, the Trump administration is defunding the police, as if that's a bad thing, right? Like denouncing it as you guys who claim you hate BLM activists for defunding the police, but you're the ones defunding the police. So this is now how the rhetoric is shaping out. And I wonder if, how you guys see that. So here's my question. A, are first responders a potential wedge group that can be peeled off? And B, is that a rhetoric? How do you view that rhetoric that like Pritzker and others are making, that the Trump administration is defunding the police? Is it clever? Is it useful? Or is it actually dangerous?
I actually haven't heard this, but I don't think that's particularly useful. Or, we are past the point of no return. We will not return to liberalism or neoliberalism as we've experienced it in the 2010s. Like, that is past. That is over. It's done. So, like, any kind of rhetoric that is sort of trying to go back to that, or is trying to be like, ha, gotcha, like, you're saying this, but really you're doing the other thing. Like, they don't care. They know they're being hypocritical. Like, that's not particularly useful. I think whatever comes after this, and there will be an after, needs to involve like the profound transformation of every institution in this country, from the Supreme Court down to the local police station. And so, like, yeah, I guess I'm not super convinced about the Pritzker rhetoric. As far as first responders go, maybe, although I don't have a lot of sympathy for cops or like wanting to defend the interest of cops against other cops, like they're all part of the same apparatus of power. Labor, organized labor, and organizing labor, I think, is definitely something we should invest in and try to support and help unions become places where you don't just argue for your wage or your salary, but you also fight for, the rights of others, including your own workforce. Like a union is a place where an immigrant worker and a U.S.-born citizen could come together to fight, common.
Yeah, I don't think that it's convincing. It may be for one of the people that got tear gas, but I think seeing that through line all the way to I changed my opinion, I think the vast majority view it as another tool in the toolbox, and they're like, come on in. Like, this is just another.
The vast majority of cops in Chicago are welcoming towards.
Yeah, I think that they probably, I don't know. I actually don't want to speculate, but yes,
that would be some interesting reporting, wouldn't it?
It's not. I don't want people to speculate about what my opinions are on different things, so I'm not going to speculate on it.
Francia and I are reporters.
We should do a survey.
I mean, we need to actually do some reporting on this. Maybe there is some that I'm unaware of. What do you think, Francia?
Well, I don't know the answer to that, but I can say it's two instances where police was tear gas. One was in Brighton Park, and one was in East Side Chicago. I think the crowd was smaller in Brighton Park, or the number of police that were tear gassed, but in East Side it might have been bigger. And I would say this does not apply to Chicago, but there is someone who's very specialized, a scholar who studies the immigration system, and his name's Austin Kutcher, and he has talked about the ways that this doesn't apply to Chicago or Illinois because of the Trust Act and the Welcoming City Ordinance, but in other states, local sheriffs and local police enter these, I think it's 287G agreements, where they have the authority to make immigration arrests, and that's playing out in other states, and that's been increasing this year, like the number of sheriff offices that entered into contracts and agreements with the Department of Homeland Security to now become immigration officers as part of their police duties. So it doesn't apply to the local context, but in the national context, that's another way of expanding the immigration system. So I don't think that could change things.
I would say that from personal recent experience, when a cop is called on an ICE interaction, they come to protect the other cop, which is the federal ICE officer. I say this June 4th, was it June 4th? At the ISAB check-in, where one of our members was taken. We were trying.
One of the members of OCAP?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
We saw a huge amount of ICE officers, and then we also saw CPD arrive, and the way they placed themselves was protecting the officers from us, who were witnessing the violence taken away, that there was moms, of moms to, federal custody for deportation. That was the last time we saw Gladys physically. And so, just to say, they're gonna protect themselves, and themselves, they're part of the same, the methodology, the purpose, their, what they're buying into is the same. And so I think that's just a reminder. And I do hope that, that day, we did bring it up to certain politicians, like that day we managed to do harm reduction because a lot of us were angry and frustrated, and then it was just witnessing the violence and trying to contain ourselves, knowing that whatever we do, life is gonna be taken away either way. Maybe it will cause some injuries to some of us. But at least in that day we chose visibility, and CPD eventually retrieved from internal orders, because it was not a good look for them. But I do hope that as we continue to experience this violence, and that people might choose differently, that we don't go against the community's reaction, that we always remember where the violence is coming from, and that we create solidarity as to not buy into the end goal of, justifying more violence against us. And so I think that's just something that I hope we remember as the violence continues and increases. I think when ICE has incited the violence in our neighborhoods, back of the yards, Albany Park a couple of weeks ago, on Thursday, Swaparama, that we're trying as best as possible to try to document so that they cannot tell a different story. But there's just so many times you can contain that frustration and witness that violence towards your family.
Yep. Here's the thing, we're pretty deep into our program. It's actually after 5 o'clock now, slightly. So I think we should wrap up the formal part, but the good news is we're already in a bar, so we can just keep hanging out and talking. And I really want to encourage people to buy drinks here, because I've noticed, in general, because this is a great bar, but I've noticed that at least like 15 or 20 people have walked up and seen that there was an event going on and taken off. And so I think the bar has lost a lot of potential revenue there, and I feel bad about that, but not that bad. But you could help offset those losses by ordering some drinks. And if this is your first time coming to this wonderful venue, definitely come back. This is part of a monthly series that is a partnership between Nighthawk and New Lines Magazine, so stay tuned. Let me know if you want to get on our, actually you can just sign up for New Lines Magazine's email newsletter if you want to find out about future events. Follow us on social media, or just introduce yourself to me personally. I want to do a quick round of just plugging, though, the different groups that are represented here today. So let's start with Audrey. This is the one that seems perhaps least directly relevant in some ways to the kind of, nuts and bolts action going on. But Audrey, you're on the faculty. You're the Chicago coordinator of the Brooklyn Institute for Social Research. A lot of people might not know, even if they've heard of the BSSR, they might not know that it has a Chicago presence. So if you could say something about that.
Right, so I'll give you the pitch in like a minute. So this year, Brooklyn Institute, we're a nonprofit originally based in New York, but for the past couple of years we've been in Chicago, and I'm the coordinator. We're a nonprofit research and education center, and the core of what we do is offer high-level evening seminars for working adults in a broad range of subjects in the humanities and social sciences. So think of it as a grad seminar, but for regular people. Courses are 4 weeks long on a number of topics. So for instance, I've taught a fascism course, I teach a lot about Marxism stuff, socialism, a lot of politics, political education. So what, I guess in a part of the fight against fascism, what the Institute is trying to do is to create spaces for high-level, critical thinking about these issues outside of the regular university. Which is even more crucial now because universities are also under attack by this administration.
Yes.
And so, we teach, a lot of our faculty teach, anti-fascism stuff, anti-Zionism stuff. We talk about colonialism, we talk about Marxism, and we're creating a space where that material can be taught and can be elaborated. To have this kind of theoretical understanding of what's going on. So.
Wonderful. So for people in this room and elsewhere, if they want to find out what kinds of courses are on offer from the Chicago chapter of BISR, they can just go to the website?
Yeah, you go to the website, you look at the current courses, and there's a Chicago tab, and you can look it up. Upcoming next month, we have 3 classes, and I'll stop. I'm teaching a course in the Frankfurt School next month. Frankfurt School, critical theorists from the 1940s, 1950s, thinking about fascism. We have a course on Stuart Hall, who's a famous cultural theorist, coming up, and a course on Freud. That's for November, and then we'll have more stuff in winter.
Wonderful, thank you. Those are 4-week courses, right?
4-week courses, yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. And Xanat, if you want to say anything else about OCAD, how people can get involved, support it, volunteer, become a member, or just find out more about what OCAD is doing.
I would say check out our website, organizedcommunities.org. Right now we're not organizing very public things, but we're working internally and trying to address and help with the documentation and the tactics that are surging in our organizing hubs. But yeah, I would say check out our website.
Okay, thank you. And Francia, as I said in the introduction, but some people might have missed that, Block Club Chicago, people can get on the email list, right? They can follow on social media. What else would you want people to know about how to follow Block Club Chicago?
Yes, we are on every social media platform, and we have our website, blockclubchicago.org. You can get daily newsletters with the top news of the day every morning and every afternoon if you subscribe to it. There are specific neighborhood newsletters that go out once or twice a week by our reporters. So for instance, I send out a newsletter for Pilsen Little Village and Back of the Yards Tuesdays and Thursdays, and other reporters have different days. So if you go to the website, you will find all of our reporting there, and if not, you can find us on social media as well.
Yeah, I subscribe to the Rogers Park newsletter because I live in Rogers Park. I love the way the website is organized. So if you want to just look at what's happening in a specific neighborhood of Chicago, those tabs are all there. You can just click on Albany Park, Rogers Park, Back of the Yards, Brighton Park, what have you, and you can just get all of the archive of every article on that topic in reverse chronological order. Super helpful. I also want to plug Xanat's own social media Francia's social media a little bit. Not only should you follow Block Club Chicago, I think you should follow Francia because she does a lot of great posting on social media herself. Can you tell people where to follow you?
Yes, I'm on Instagram as Francia _Garcia with an H at the end. I'm on X, but I try not to be there too much, so I just post my stories, and you can find them on X under the same hashtag, and Blue Sky as well. Trying to be on TikTok, but that's very time consuming, and that time is something I don't have right now, but Blog Club has a TikTok page, so you can find some of our explainers there. And all of our reporters tend to have a social media presence, so if you're interested in a neighborhood, find your reporter on our website and then follow them. And lastly, if you see something happening in your neighborhood and no one's reporting about it and it's important, or if we're missing something, you can send tips to us. You can reach out to individual reporters, or you can reach out to our newsroom at blogclubshy.org and send tips or information or comments. We appreciate that.
I'm really glad you mentioned that. That's great. And Mark, the National Immigrant Justice Center.
Yeah, just go to our, as far as the National Immigrant Justice Center, go to our website, sign up for our newsletter. I am very proud of my own organization, but I would pitch a second to donate to OCAD, sign up at ICER, donate some money for gas for rapid response people. That's the way that we can really make a difference day to day. So I would encourage going to ICER's website, sign up for a rapid response training, and then get signed to it. Donate to OCAD for gas money for all these rapid response people, and we'll just keep fighting. Like I said, every Chicagoan is we need as many Chicagoans out there as we possibly can. That is how we're going to get past this moment.
And I want to thank all four of you again for carving out time. You don't have a lot of free time right now. You guys are working around the clock, doing reporting, doing organizing, doing theorizing, defending communities in this city, and it's incredibly vital work. And I know how busy you were, and it was amazing to be able to get all four of them available at the same time during this crisis moment. And I want to thank everybody here who came out today. I really appreciate you being here. I want to thank our partners here at Nighthawk, David Chavez in particular. I want to thank Andy Thayer for coming to record the event and participating in the discussion. And if you want to find out about future events or read New Lines magazine for reporting and analysis related to these kinds of themes, you can scan that QR code up there on the banner, or just go to newlinesmag.com and sign up for our newsletter. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Like Andy said, you're welcome to stay.